display rather. Duplicate. Okay. Duplicate. Alright, so good morning. Welcome to CSS School of Web. And today we are going to try to build this web app or website. We're going to start from the basics, like the structure. We are going to build a structure in HTML. And then from there we build up by adding a little styling with CSS. And then maybe, if time permits, we add some little functionalities with JavaScript. So before I start, how familiar are you with web development? Like, not really much. So is this your first time, or you've played around a bit? Okay. So let's get to it. Now, to build a website, you usually create files, right? And then you specify your instructions in those files. So we are going to be using an IDE. I prefer Visual Studio to start with. And since you've already had some experience, I don't think I need to explain what an IDE is, so we can just jump right into it. So the first thing we would create here is an HTML file. And an HTML file has an HTML extension, .html extension. So the first thing we'll do here is index.html. So the name of this file is index and the extension .html. Now, HTML is a markup language, so we use it to specify the structure of content on the web. And everything that is specifying structure itself has structure. So HTML itself has a specific structure we use to build a website. And in HTML, we play around with tags, elements. And elements, you can break them into tags. And we have the opening and then the closing tags. So the first thing here is, right now we are using, there are different versions of HTML. And the current version is HTML5. So the first thing you do is HTML5 is, you tell the file what version of HTML you are using. So here, you specify doc type. So that's like the document type. Document. So doc type. HTML. So here you are telling when whatever engine is rendering your HTML file that you are using HTML5. Although this doesn't really enable the engine render, but then it's just a way of specifying to whoever is reading the code, because if the engine is pre-built to run HTML5, if you don't put this there, it will still run it as HTML5. So the next thing we would create is an HTML element. So the first thing is to specify the doc type, and then next we are going to create an HTML element. And to create elements, we play around with tags. And then, so most HTML elements have an opening and then a closing tag. So you start with HTML, the opening tag, and then the IDE I'm using automatically closes it for me. So the first thing here, the one I'm highlighting, is the opening tag. And then this is the closing tag. Okay. So after that, we specify the head. So the head contains metadata and links to resources that your HTML file would need. So the first metadata we would like to set is the character encoding. So you need to specify the right character encoding for your system, so that if maybe your website encounters an engine that is not built properly, it can actually take the character encoding from your metadata and then use that character encoding in your HTML document. So here we will use the meta tag, and to specify the character encoding, you use something called chars character set. So char set and you equate it to UTF-8. So Unicode, this is the Unicode character encoding, I think. Then you close it. So the meta tag or the meta element is an example of an element that doesn't use a closing tag. So there are some elements that, most elements have closing tags, but then some elements do not have closing tag, and the meta tag is one of them. So here the metadata is like a description of the file. So this particular file uses the Unicode encoding scheme, text character encoding scheme. Then over what other metadata do we want to specify? I think for now let's leave it here. Let's leave it here. So now you can also specify the title of the website, right? And to specify the title, you use the title tag. So we are going to specify the title. So I'm going to name it School of Web. And that's about it. So all of this, sorry, I was supposed to do something. So all of this is supposed to be in the head tag. All of this is supposed to be in the head tag. So the head tag contains the metadata for the document, and all this metadata should go into the head tag and a head element. So after the head, you have the body. So we are going to create the body by creating a body element. Body. So we have the body. We get it right. So most of the time when you look at a website, you would notice that we have different sections. Let me open this up. You notice that we have different sections. Most of the time, almost every time, the first section is the header, the navigation section. Over here you can see the navigation that enables you to move through different parts of the website. And then below the navigation you have something like the header of the site. And then you move down, you notice that you have different sections in the website, right? So these different sections, the structure of these different sections are specified in the HTML file. So the first thing we are going to try to create today is the navigation bar. So in our code, to specify the structure of the navigation bar, you use elements or tags. So the first thing we are going to create is our navigation bar. And to create your navigation, you usually use the nav tag. So we are going to open the nav element, let me put it that way. So here we have a navigation element. So this has built like a basic structure for our navigation. Okay. Navigation. Now, I'm going to do something real quick so we can see the navigation. Okay. So we just created a nav element, and this nav element is visible here in background red. So this thing here is what we just created. So we just created like a basic structure for a navigation bar. But then if you look at it, let's look at the other website. Okay, let's proceed with this first. Okay, so we've created a basic structure, so let's proceed. Now, if you look at the other website, you'll notice that they have like a logo here, and then a bunch of navigation links, and then they have two buttons here, right? And it's like they are divided. The logo is separated from the navigation links, and the navigation link is kind of separated from the buttons, you see. So here you are noticing the structure. So you notice that some things are separated and grouped together. So usually things that are grouped together, you put them in one element, you understand? So you notice things that are grouped together and then put them in a particular element, and then yeah, so let's do that real quick. So we are going to put this navigation in its own element. We are going to put these nav links in their own element, and you are going to put the button in their own element. So we are going to define the structure for those groups. So over here, this is where we are creating the navigation. Inside the element, we have three structures, right? One for the logo. And sometimes when you don't, there are some, HTML provides us with tags, and these tags are semantic, meaning that they mean something. For example, body means the body of the document. Nav means the navigation of the document. But then there are some certain things that don't have semantic meaning. For example, the logo. I don't think there is a logo element for creating logo. Is there something like that? So things that don't have semantic tags for them, we use div. So we have something called div tags. So should I say semanticless scenarios? So when you have semanticless scenarios, then you use the div tag. So over here, we are going to be using div, right? So this div is going to be for our logo. So the first div is going to be for our logo. Now, when you are coding along, sometimes things might get messy. So it's helpful to use comments. And commenting in HTML is just like creating a tag, but then it's a little bit different. So you open your tag, and you specify an exclamation mark, then like minus minus, and then you close it with minus minus, and then you close the tag with the should I say greater than symbol. So this creates a comment, right? And do you know what a comment is? So a comment is like a particular section of these documents that is not going to get rendered by whatever HTML engine that encounters this document. So anytime you pass through, or anytime the computer is trying to render this document, it's going to ignore whatever is inside this comment tag. So here in the comment, we are just going to specify that this is our logo section, right? And then we are going to create another comment. So in that comment, we are going to specify the nav links section, and then we are going to create a structure for that using a div. And then at the bottom, we're also going to create the button section. So we are going to call it nav button. So navigation button section, and over here I'm going to specify div. Right. So before I proceed, right now you see we are having sections, section, and there is actually a tag for sections in HTML. So anytime you're having sections of things, there is something called a section tag. So instead of using div here, we can relate with the semantics of things. We are creating sections, so we are going to use section tags instead. Okay, so over here, instead of using divs, I'm going to replace them with what? Sections. So find div, replace them with section. Right. So I've quickly replaced them with what? Replace all the div tags here with sections, right? Now, let me do something real quick so we see these individual sections. Section. Okay, so if we go back to our browser and render what we just did, we can see the individual sections, right? Okay, so now inside these sections, if we look at this website, inside these different sections, we have the first section has the logo, the second section has the links, and then the last section has the button. So we are going to try to create the logo, the links, and the buttons inside these individual sections. So we move to section 1, right? And in section 1, we are going to create a logo. And a logo doesn't have something like a logo tag, so we are going to use a div tag to create a logo. So here, div is for the logo. Now, in the links section or the nav link section, we are going to create links, right? And in HTML, to specify links, you use the anchor tag. And to create an anchor tag, you just specify A in the opening tag and then the closing tag. So this is how you create an anchor tag. Later on, we are going to be learning how to link them actually, but then for now we are just defining the structures. So here we've created an anchor tag. Now, it's usually helpful to wrap certain things to wrap certain things in. Okay. For now, let's proceed with this, and we'll come back to that later. So let's look at the website we are trying to follow. The first thing here is products. The next thing is solution. Next thing is how it works. Next thing is pricing, benefits, and then get a demo. So we are going to put these things in the anchor tags. So first thing first, product. So in here we are going to specify product. Then we're going to create another anchor tag for solutions, and we're going to create another anchor tag for how it works. We're going to create another one for pricing. That's a good memory there. And then we're going to create another tag for okay, so let's check it. Benefits and get a demo. So benefits, and then get a demo. Right. So we've created anchor tags for individual links, right? So these anchor tags will enable us create links to other files or other pages. But then for now, we are just defining the structure. So let's go and render it in our browser and see how it looks like. So if you notice, we have the links in the second section. Okay. So let me do something real quick so we can see the links themselves. Tag. Okay, so we can see the individual links, right? Now, in the logo, we are going to use a name. We are just going to specify a name for the logo right now. Let's see what they used. They use an icon and then a name, but then we are just going to use the name for now. So over here in the section, in the logo section, in the logo div tag, we are going to specify logo, or should I say demo logo. And over here, if we render it, we should see demo logo. And then the last section, we have two buttons, right? So we are going to be creating two buttons in the last section. So here, to create a button in HTML, you use the button element. So here we are just going to use button for the first button, and in the first button, I think we had a login. Yeah, login. So over here, login, And then in the second button, we have try it for free. Okay. Try free. Now, so we have two buttons. So now we've defined the structure of our HTML file for the navigation, or we've defined the structure of the navigation for our website. I'm going to remove all the styling I did so we can see it in its raw form. Okay. So this is how it looks like. Yeah, the structure is there, but then it's very ugly. So usually after defining your structure, you notice that you have a very ugly document. So to kind of add styling to your document, we use CSS. And HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and then CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. So it's a, should I say, a styling system that we use to design websites, to add styles to our website. So here we are going to be adding certain styles to this particular navigation, right? So if you notice, if you are following along, you notice that I did something like I opened a style, I created a style element, right? So for now we are going to be using the style element to style our navigation. Then later on I'll teach you how to create a separate file and put your styles inside, and create a separate folder, put your styles inside, and then link your HTML document to that particular style file. But for now, the first thing we are going to do is we are going to style this stuff, we are going to create a style element, right? So HTML comes with a style element that enables us to style our elements in the document. So we are opening this style element, and then the way CSS works is we specify our target, we specify what we are trying to style, and then we style it, or we modify its properties. So here, if you look at it, if you look at the main site we are trying to, you see that everything here is horizontally aligned, right? So we have so many ways of doing this, but then I would like to introduce you to the flex way of doing this, so we can flex a little bit, right? So over here, we are going to be using flex to create this kind of horizontal effect, let me put it that way. So in our own document, we notice that everything here is in a vertical form, top to bottom. Let me think I've deleted the styles. So now, first thing I'm going to do is try to add backgrounds to our sections, so our individual sections, so we can see them. Now, to style something, you target it. So we are trying to style the section, right? So we target section. So this is our target. We've specified our target. Then we open curly braces, open and close. We open and close. Okay. So open the curly brace, close the curly brace, and then inside the curly brace we are going to be specifying the style or modifying the property of whatever we have selected. So we've selected the section, and now we want to give the section a background, right? A background color. So we are going to modify the background color property of that section. So we are going to select the background color of that section and give it a value. So after specifying the property, you bring, is that a colon? Colon. You bring a colon, and then you specify the value. In this case, let's say we want to give it what value, pick a value. Gray. Okay, so we give it gray. So right now we've targeted a particular element, and then using these delimiters, the opening braces, and with the opening and close braces, we've specified a section, and inside that place we are modifying the property, right? So here we've taken the background color property and we've given it a different value. Default it was, I think, white, right? But then now we've changed it to what? Gray. So when we go back to view our document, we should see that all sections have a background gray. I think the reason why we can see the second section's background is because it already has like children elements inside that are taking up the whole space. So now these sections are vertically aligned, so we want to make them horizontally aligned. So to make a particular to make the children element of a particular element horizontally aligned, so let me go back to our code. So if you look at the structure we have here, the nav element is the parent element, right? And then we have different sections inside the nav. Where did this go? Section inside the nav element. So we have different sections inside the nav element. So we are trying to horizontally align these sections, right? So to horizontally align these sections, we target the parent element, and in this case the parent element is the nav element. So we are going to be like target nav, and then so by default it has a block display, so everything is like block, and then it's vertically aligned. But then we want to change it to a flex display so that everything will be horizontally aligned. So flex gives us the ability to change the alignment of elements in HTML. So over here we are going to set the display property of the nav element from block. The default is block, but then we are going to set it to what? Flex. And once you specify flex as the display property, everything within that element, so everything within the nav is going to be horizontally aligned. So let's go back to the document, and you can see that now we have everything horizontally aligned, right? But then let's compare this with the other site. So over here you can see that they have spacing in between, so it's like there is space between them. But then in our document we don't have space, we don't have like space between our content, right? So we want to justify our contents by placing space between them. So in order to do that, we attack we modify the justify content property of the nav element. So in the nav element we are going to be like justify content, and then what do we want to do? We want to put space in between the individual sections. So here we are going to be like space between, right? So we've moved from block to flex to create the horizontal effect. Now everything is kind of grouped to one section, but then we want space in between them. So we justify our contents by placing what? Space in between. So we modify the justify content property and set it to space between. Now if you are wondering the default value for justify content is flex. I think it will be start, or in some cases flex start. It's the same thing, but then we are moving it from flex start to space between. Okay, so over here if you refresh, you can see that now we have space in between our individual sections. Now we cannot see the navigation, so let's give it a background color so that we can see what we are working with. So this time around I'm going to choose, so the background of our navigation, I want it to be purple. Okay, so over here we kind of see our navigation, right? But then let's look at this navigation. Seems like, okay, let me do something real quick. Okay, so if you look at our navigation, it seems like there is spacing inside. If you look inside, over here, it's like there is no spacing at the top and then at the bottom. But then when you look at this particular site, you see that there is spacing at the top and then at the bottom. So let's try and add spacing at the top and then bottom of our own navigation. Now, to add spacing at the top and then the bottom, we use the padding property. As I would say, that's the simplest way to go about it. You can also specify the height and then modify the individual elements within the navigation by using flex, but then that will be a long process. So the simplest way to go about it is to use paddings, right? So we are going to add paddings. So these paddings are like spaces, you understand? So we are going to add spaces to our navigation element, right? So now to add spacing to our navigation element or to add padding, we specify that we want to modify the padding property. So here, padding, and then now we give it a value. So we are going to give it, see, so far we've been giving like, we've been specifying our values in words, but then here we are going to be giving it a numeric value. And in CSS, we have different numeric values. We have pixels, we have REM, we have EM, we have percentage. We have so many numeric values, but then we are going to start with pixels. So here we are going to use, say, 10 pixels. Now, before we proceed, I would like to show you something. Okay. Okay, so by default, most look at this section of the screen. So by default, most HTML engines view individual elements. Every tag you create, every element you create, they view it like this, right? And here you can specify spacings, right? So here we are working with what? Padding, right? So if you look at this section, you see that over here, this is padding. This is how the engine sees the padding, right? So this is the main element, the content of the element, and then over here is where you specify the padding. Then from the padding you move to the border, and then from the border you move to the margin, right? So here we are going to be modifying the padding, right? So here the top section, you can specify padding for this section. You can specify padding for this section, you can specify padding for this section, and you can specify padding for this section. And you are going to see what I mean. So let's quickly re-render what we've done. So you see that there is spacing throughout, right? 10 pixels spacing here, 10 pixel spacing here, 10 pixel spacing here, and then 10 pixel spacing here. So by default, it picks left, top, right, bottom, right? That's by default. So over here, let's say we don't want to add spacing to this particular part. Let's say we don't want to add spacing to the left and then to the right. We only want to add spacing to the top and then the bottom. We can do it by saying, okay, so the beginner way of doing things is we'll go here and say padding top, we want 10 pixels, but then padding, let's say left, we want 0, we don't want anything there. Padding right, we don't want anything there. And then padding at the bottom, we want another 10 pixels. This is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, so let me refresh this so you see the effect. So if you look at it closely, we have spacing here and we have spacing here, but then when I refresh, see that the spacing is gone. We only have it at the top and then the bottom. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, instead of specifying the padding like this, we can just take the padding property, and remember I was like left, top, right, bottom. So left we don't want anything, then we move space. Top we want 10 pixels, and right we don't want anything, and then bottom we want 10 pixels. So this is like an easier way of doing it. So when you refresh, okay, so let me specify 10 pixels everywhere first. 10 pixels everywhere first, so we can see the contrast between both scenarios. So over here, when I refresh, you see the spacing is back, but then when I remove the 10 pixels from the left and the right, so when I remove the 10 pixels from the left and the right and I refresh, you can see that, okay, now that's, okay, I think it's for the top right. So okay, I had it wrong. So it's rather, I think it goes, my apologies. Okay, so it's rather top 10 pixels, then the next thing is the right. So for the right we want 0, and then the bottom 10 pixels, and then the left 0. So top right, left, top right, bottom left. So when I save this and then refresh, you should have something like this back again. So what we want to do is we want to add more spacing, right? So that we are trying to mimic this, or we are trying to clone this navigation, and you can see that there is a lot of spacing here and there is a lot of spacing here. So we want to achieve that effect. So in order to do that, we are going to increase the padding. But then there is another simpler way of doing this. Instead of doing it this way, we can also do it this way. We can only specify two properties. So here, the first one will be for the top and the bottom, so 10 pixels, and then the next one will be for the left and then the right. So here we are going to specify 0. And when you refresh, you would see that we have the same effect, you see. So this is the simplest way of specifying it in terms of vertical and then horizontal padding. So here we are going to increase the top and the bottom padding from, let's say, 10 to 50. And then, see, we have that kind of effect. Now, let's remove all the backgrounds to see what we are working with. We are getting there, right? We are getting there. So let's look at what we are trying to mimic again. And over here, if you look at the navigation links, it seems like there is spacing between them, right? Right, and we can achieve this spacing by using, you guessed it, padding. So we are going to specify padding for these individual navigation links in our own navigation bar. So here we are going to try and add spacings here. Now, each navigation link in the navigation section is inside an anchor tag, right? So if you want to add padding to the navigation link, we are going to target the anchor tag. So in our style, over here, we are going to have the anchor tag, and then we are going to specify padding. So this time around, we don't want top and bottom padding, we want left and right padding. So here, top and bottom is going to be set to 0, and let's give left and right, let's say 10 pixels. So if you refresh, you can see that you achieved the same effect. Now there is spacing in between the individual links. Now over here, let's look at the buttons, right? So let's touch the buttons a little bit. So if you notice, seems like our button has a gray background, and it doesn't have this black border, right? I showed you how the document views the padding, the margin, and then the border. So here we are going to, for our buttons, we are going to change the background, add some border to it, and then if you look at the buttons too, it seems like there is spacing, the top and bottom spacing bigger than then the left and then the right spacing. So we're also going to try and create this effect, right? So let's move back. So now, what are we trying to style? We are trying to style our buttons. So we target the button here, B-U-T-T, and then the background, we are going to change it from gray to white, and then the border is black, right? So to modify the border property, we specify border, right? And then the first value is going to be the width of the border. How big do you want the border to be? Do you want to be very big or very small? And so since we've already started with the pixel way of things, we are going to continue with using pixels. So over here, we are going to specify that we want a border of, let's say, 5 pixels, right? And then the next thing is going to be the type of border you want. So we have different types of border, but then for starters, we are going to be using solid borders. So when I specify solid, we'll try changing it to the different types, and then we'll see the different effects. So here we have a solid border, and then the next thing is going to be the color of the border, and the color of our border was black, right? So here is going to be black, right? So the width, the type of border, and then the color. So the last thing is the padding, or the spacing in the button. So if you look at it, the other button had more spacing at the top and bottom than at the left and then the right. So padding, top and bottom is going to have more spacing than left and right. So let's say 10 pixels and then 5 pixels. Now let's see how this turns out. So we have something like this. So we are getting there. Okay. So far. Let's look at this one more thing before we proceed. Now if you look at the edge of our button, see, it's very sharp. But then if you look at the edge of this button, it's like it has a rounded edge, right? So to create this round edge effect, we are going to modify the border radius property of our button element. So over here below the border, we want to modify the border radius. We don't want it to be too sharp. So we are going to give the border a specific radius. The more radius, the more round it is. So here, border radius. So by default, it's 0. That's why it's so sharp like that. But then we can move it to, let's say, 5 pixels. So if we go back, this is the sharp border, and then when you refresh, you have a rounded effect. Okay, so far so good. Now we are going to be playing with the fonts, right? So if you look at ours, seems like ours is too light and too small. Theirs is big and bold, right? So let's try and create this big and bold effect. So I'm sorry. So we are going to be changing the entire font of the navigation, right? So if you use Word, I'm sure everybody here has used Word. You have something like Times New Roman, sans serif. So to modify the type of font you are using, all these fonts are grouped into different font families. So to modify the font you are using, you modify the font family property. So to give this particular navigation a different font, you modify the font family property. Then immediately you see that if you're using a good IDE, you would have so many options available to you. But then we are going to use sans serif. I like sans serif. So sans serif. That's one font I like using. Usually I like using it with Google Fonts, pop-ins, but then that's another topic. So here when you change, you see that the font has changed. You see. So let me give the effect. Navigation. So this was our previous font, and then this is the sans serif font. Okay. Now it looks like it's a little bit bold, but then let's make it more bold. So to make something more bold, or to make the font more bold, you specify the font weight property, or you modify the font weight property. So font weight, you see you have options, bold. So here we have normal, we have light, we have lighter, we have bold. So lighter, light, normal, bold, bolder. So in this case, let's just make it bold. So over here, we have a bold font. Should we make it bolder? Let's make it bolder. Although most of the time you wouldn't see the effect, but then we are making it bolder. Still the same thing. But then here you see now we have a more, should I say, more bold font than the previous. And then the font type we chose is starting to make the style look a little bit nice. So let's go back and compare. Now, if you look at the individual letters themselves of these links, you notice that ours is a little bit, should I say, cramped together. It's like ours is more pushed together than theirs. Their link, the individual letters of their link have more spacing around them. I don't know if you can see it. So we are also going to try and create that effect. So here in the navigation links, which are specified in the anchor tags, we are going to be modifying the spacing in between the letters. So we are going to be modifying the letter spacing property. So in the letter spacing property, we can say we want spacing in between those letters to be, let's say, 0.5 pixels. So if we go back and we look, we've added more spacing in between. So let me inspect, so you see the effect. In the nav link section, let's take over here. Okay, so here, less spacing, more spacing. It's a minor effect, but then it adds up in total. So here we have more spacing. Now, the last thing we are going to try to do before I round up is we are going to try to align individual elements in our navigation. So if you look at it, this is at the top, this is at the top, and it's like the buttons are at the bottom. But then if you look at this particular navigation, everything is aligned. Even the buttons are aligned with the links. But then if you look at ours, it's like our buttons are at the bottom and then our links are at the top. So we use the flex to create the horizontal effect. We can also use the flex to align things vertically. So we want to align this thing, we want the vertical alignment of our navigation to be at the center. So we want to align the items in our navigation. So to align something, or to align the items in our navigation, we use the align items property. Align items property, and we specify that to what? Center. So when you go back and you refresh, you are going to see that everything is going to align to the center. So now it's like we have an aligned navigation. So let's add a little bit spacing around our navigation. Seems like it's too close to the wall, right? So let's add a little bit spacing to our navigation. So over here in our navigation, the left and the right, we specified it to be 0. Let's modify it and give it, let's say, 20 pixels. So it's far away from the border, right? So now we have something like this. So far, I think we are getting there, right? We are getting there. Okay. Now, I'm going to stop here, but then before I stop here, I want to take you through certain things in the code. Now, best practice is separation of, should I say separation of concerns? We like to make things more modular when we are creating systems. So instead of putting all the styling and then the structure in one document, we like to separate the styling and then separate the structure, so that when there is a problem with the styling, we go to where the styles are. When there is a problem with the structure, we move to where the structure is. Now, to create a separate space or a separate file for our style, you remember we are styling with CSS, right? And all you just need to do is to create a different file, and that file needs to have the .css extension. So over here we are going to create a new file, and you can name it whatever you want, but then for this tutorial I'm going to be naming it index.css, right? So we have index.css. Now inside the index.css, we are going to place all our styles inside. Repetition, right? So here we are going to copy all our styles, and then we are going to put it in the CSS file, in the CSS file. So we have the HTML file and we have the CSS file. But then let's go back and refresh and see what happens. Everything collapsed. That's because our HTML file does not know where to pick the style from. So we need to go and specify where the style is, or we need to teach our HTML document to look for the styling, or where to look for the styling. So over here in the HTML document, to specify where the style is, you use the link tag. And the link tag is another example of a tag that, the link element is another example of an element that doesn't have a closing tag. So over here, link, and then we are going to close the link. So now we need to tell the HTML document that we are trying to link to a style sheet, right? So to tell it that we are trying to link to a style sheet, you specify the rel property of this HTML element, and you assign it to style sheet. So now it knows that we are trying to link to a style sheet, and then we need to specify the path or the location of this style sheet. So if you look at the HTML document, usually we specify the path with respect to where the HTML document is. So here the HTML document is in the same folder as the .css document. So in the HTML document, we are going to specify href or reference to index.css. You see, so what I'm trying to say is, okay, link to a style sheet, and this style sheet is in the same folder as I am. So just pick whatever index.css file is in this folder, right? So assuming we had a separate folder, let's say we had so many style sheets, and then we wanted to put them in a separate folder, and so we created a folder called styles, right? And then we placed this index.css inside the styles. Right, now we want to tell our document to go into the styles folder and then pick the index.css. So we specify the path. So I'm currently in this particular folder. So from this folder, move to the styles folder and then pick index.css and use the styling. So over here, if we go back and then we refresh, the styling applies, right? And then the last thing, so let's take a look at our index.css. So I would like to talk about hierarchy in styling. So most of the time when you style, you specify properties, and then as the properties come into memory, you specify them. But then sometimes you might be coding along and then your style sheet becomes too big, right? And then let's say there is a particular property you want to modify, and then now it's a mess, right? So let's say you were coding along and then right now you have like, let's say 200 lines of styles. You just keep creating it, and then right now you have 200, let's say 200 lines of styles over here, right? And then now you want to change just a particular property. Now it becomes a stress because you have to go check because you did everything in a haphazard way. So best practice is, instead of doing this, instead of doing this, you arrange everything in an alphabetical order. So we are starting from A, right? So here we have an anchor tag. So we move the anchor tag to the top, right? So we move the anchor tag to the top, and then in terms of alphabetical hierarchy, the button comes next. So here we move the button after the anchor tag, and then the last thing will be the navigation. So here we've arranged everything in an alphabetical order. So now if you are looking for the anchor tag, okay, we know that we have to move to the top of our document. If you are looking for maybe something that is named with Z, we move to the bottom of the document. Now in the individual stylings too, individual properties here, it's also advisable to arrange them in an alphabetical order, so that if you are looking for a particular property that begins with A, you look at the top, so you know where to find it. So over here, I think L comes before P, right? So we move L to the top. And then, okay, I think I've already done this here. And then over here too, we look at it, A, I think F comes before J, right? So we move F to the top here, and then we've done everything we need to do. So we're going to save this, and then just makes the whole thing more structured, so that when you're looking for something, you can easily find it. Okay, on this note, I will end here. So in the next meeting, we'll try to add an icon and then add the individual spacing, and then wrap up with the navigation, and then we move to the header. So when we meet, the next time we meet, we are going to be talking about hierarchy in text. So let me just fill you in. Here it's more bigger, so this is more important, this is less important, and this is the least important thing here. So usually you use the font to depict what is more important and what is less important. So we are going to be considering all those things in the next meeting. All right, it's been fun, and I would like to end here.